there was one file they forgot to wipe. A single, orphaned data packet in a sea of sanitized servers. It was a ghost in the machine they had tried so desperately to exorcise. I suppose, in the grand, bureaucratic rush to bury a multi-billion-dollar secret, one mistake is statistically inevitable. This was theirs. And what was inside it, it still haunts my quiet moments. It's the reason I'm talking now. By the end of this story, you'll understand why I had to disappear. And why it no longer matters who comes looking for me. You need to understand who I am. Or who I was. I served for 22 years. I took an oath under 3 different administrations, my hand on a Bible I'm not sure I ever believed in. My life was a series of windowless rooms, encrypted reports, and the quiet, crushing weight of knowing things. I saw the raw intelligence, the unredacted documents that would give the world a permanent migraine. I was a good soldier. I kept the secrets. I believed I was protecting something important. But there are some truths that are too heavy to carry forever. They corrode you from the inside out. This is one of them. It all started in the fall of 2003. The world was still reeling, still paranoid. The national security apparatus was flush with cash and a mandate to prevent the unthinkable from ever happening again. Any idea, no matter how outlandish, was on the table. And in that frenzy of innovation and fear, Project Kaleidoscope was born. The official version, the one you'll find in the heavily redacted congressional postmortems if you dig deep enough, is a simple and believable story of government waste. The National Security Agency, my former employer, greenlit a revolutionary data mining program. The objective was ambitious, almost arrogant, to build a predictive engine. A digital Cassandra. Kaleidoscope was designed to sift through the noise of global communications, petabytes of emails, financial transactions, satellite data, phone calls, the whole digital exhaust of a planet, and find patterns of threat before they materialized. It was supposed to be the ultimate early warning system. A way to see the storm before the first drop of rain fell. They poured billions into it. They built a dedicated server farm in the Utah desert, a temple of humming silicon cooled by its own subterranean river. The lead engineers were poached from the top tech firms in the world, promised a mission that would dwarf anything they could achieve in the private sector. For a few years, Fort Meade was buzzing with talk of it. It was the next Manhattan Project, the key that would finally lock the door on uncertainty. Then, around 2007, the buzz died down. The official report started to leak out, first as whispers, then as formal admissions of failure. The project, the story went, was a boondoggle. A magnificent, expensive flop. The system was too complex. The algorithms produced too many false positives. It couldn't tell the difference between a terrorist plot and a group of friends planning a surprise party. It was, in the dry language of the final summary report, computationally inefficient and strategically unreliable. And so, Project Kaleidoscope was quietly, unceremoniously decommissioned. The servers were wiped, the facility repurposed, the personnel reassigned. It became a cautionary tale within the agency, a symbol of hubris. Just another failed government project, swallowed by the sands of time and budgetary reviews. The world bought it. Congress bought it. Even most of the agency bought it. But that wasn't the truth. Not even close. I was a mid-level analyst on the Kaleidoscope Oversight Committee. My job was to be the bridge between the engineers and the strategists, to translate the raw output into actionable intelligence briefs. I wasn't a programmer, but I understood the data. I saw the first reports that came out of the system. And they weren't inefficient. They were impossible. In the beginning, they were small things. A report predicting a minor stock market fluctuation in a specific tech company, accurate to the decimal point, 3 days before it happened. A forecast of a localized power outage in a suburb of Brussels, flagged 24 hours in advance, citing a specific transformer failure. We dismissed them as coincidences. Statistical flukes. The system was casting such a wide net, it was bound to catch a few strange fish. Our job was to find threats, not to play the stock market or predict municipal maintenance issues. But the flukes kept coming. They grew in specificity, in significance. The machine wasn't forecasting based on existing data. It wasn't extrapolating trends. It felt different. It felt like we had built a telescope, pointed it at the horizon, and were somehow seeing the reflection of things that were behind us. It was a faint signal, an echo bouncing off the surface of tomorrow. The official story is a lie designed to conceal a terrifying success. The project wasn't shut down because it didn't work. It was shut down because it worked too well. It wasn't a predictive engine. It was a receiver. And it had just picked up its first clear broadcast from the future. The file they missed, the one I copied on a cold, trembling night before the kill switches were thrown, it wasn't a report. It was a warning. And it was about us. The first real crack in the official narrative wasn't a thunderclap, it was a whisper. In the sterile, climate-controlled rooms where we monitored Kaleidoscope's output, we called them ghosts in the machine. That was the sanitized term. It was palatable. It suggested a software bug, a random artifact of a system so complex it was bound to have quirks. Anything was better than admitting what we were really thinking. The lead architect, a man named Dr. Eris Thorne, was a zealot of logic. He was a gaunt, brilliant man who seemed to subsist entirely on black coffee and the certainty of his own code. To him, Kaleidoscope was a cathedral of pure mathematics. Every ghost was a blasphemy he was determined to stamp out. It's a feedback loop, he'd insist during our tense morning briefings, his hand sketching frantic diagrams on a whiteboard. The system is sampling its own predictive models and mistaking them for external data. It's an echo chamber. He wanted to believe that. We all did. It was the only rational explanation. We were dealing with an unprecedented volume of information. The algorithms were learning, adapting, rewriting themselves on the fly. Of course, there would be anomalies. But the anomalies had a strange habit of coming true. The first incident we couldn't ignore came on a Tuesday. The system flagged a non-critical event, a bridge collapse. It was a specific bridge, the I-35W Mississippi River Bridge in Minneapolis. The report was disturbingly precise. It gave a date, 4 days in the future. And it gave a time, 6:05 p.m. Central. It even flagged the cause, a catastrophic failure in a specific gusset plate due to a design flaw. The report was automatically categorized as low priority. It wasn't a terrorist attack. It wasn't foreign espionage. It was a civil engineering problem. It was junk data. My superior, a man named Marcus Gallo, looked at the report with a tired sigh. Gallo was a creature of the agency, a lifer. He had a face like a worn leather briefcase and an unwavering faith in protocol. Another ghost, he said, and tossed the printout into the shred bin. Thorne's team will patch it. 4 days later, I was working late, compiling a report on something entirely unrelated. The television in the corner of the office was on, muted, playing a national news channel as it always did. I remember looking up and seeing the live footage. A cloud of dust. Mangled steel. Cars tilted at impossible angles, submerged in the dark water of the Mississippi. The chirn at the bottom of the screen was stark, deadly bridge collapse in Minneapolis. My blood ran cold. I walked over to the TV and unmuted it. A frantic reporter was on the scene. The collapse occurred just moments ago, at the height of evening rush hour, around 6:05 p.m. I felt a wave of nausea. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 6:20 p.m. Central Time. I went back to my desk and pulled the shred bin from under Gallo's desk, my hands shaking. I emptied it onto the floor, frantically piecing together the strips of paper. There it was. The date, The time. The bridge. The gusset plate. The next morning, the briefing room was silent. Gallo was pale. Even Dr. Thorne seemed shaken, though he tried to hide it. "It's a coincidence," Thorne said, his voice lacking its usual conviction. "A 1 in a billion statistical anomaly. The system must have picked up on structural engineering reports, chatter about known issues with the bridge. It synthesized a prediction. But we all knew that was a lie. We had checked. There were no such reports in the data stream Kaleidoscope had analyzed. The design flaw was a ghost, buried in blueprints from the 1960s. No one was talking about it. No one knew. Until now. That was the moment the project fractured. It was no longer a unified effort. We split into two unspoken camps. There were Thorne's engineers, who now worked with a frantic urgency to debug the system, to silence the ghosts they refused to believe in. They saw a flaw that threatened their creation. And then there were a few of us, a handful of analysts led by me and a senior cryptographer named Elena Petrova. We saw something else. We didn't see a bug. We saw the system's true function revealing itself. It wasn't broken. It was just waking up. Gallo, caught in the middle, did what all good bureaucrats do: he buried it. He classified the I-35W report as post-event correlational analysis and backdated it. He ordered us, in no uncertain terms, to ignore all non-security-related anomalies. We were to focus on the mission. Find the terrorists. Find the spies. Everything else was noise. But I couldn't ignore it. The machine wasn't predicting. It was receiving. It wasn't analyzing the past to guess the future. It was listening to the future. And the problem with listening to the future is that sometimes, it talks back. The glitch wasn't in the code. It was in our understanding of reality. And I started to suspect, with a growing sense of dread, that we had just rung a bell that could never be unrung. Gallo's order to stand down was the gasoline on the fire. For him, it was a problem to be managed, a potential career-ending embarrassment to be swept under the rug. For me, it was a command to ignore the most important discovery in human history. I couldn't do it. And I wasn't the only one. Elena Petrova was one of the few people who looked at the impossible and didn't flinch. She was a cryptographer, a woman who saw the entire world as a system of codes waiting to be broken. Where I saw a terrifying paradox, she saw a new language emerging. While Thorne's team was trying to gag the machine, Elena wanted to teach it how to speak. We started working in secret. During the day, we did our jobs. We tracked phantom terror cells and chased down meaningless chatter, filling Gallo's desk with the mundane intelligence he wanted. But at night, we built a cage. A digital prison. Elena, with her near-supernatural command of the system's architecture, created a sandboxed partition within Kaleidoscope's core. A ghost server for the ghosts. It was a quarantined space where the anomalies could manifest without triggering the alarms that would bring Thorne's exterminators running. It was a place for us to listen, undisturbed. And the machine began to talk. It started with text, just as before. Snippets of news headlines, fragments of future obituaries, stock tickers that hadn't been invented yet. But then, it evolved. It was as if the system was learning, finding new ways to push information through the veil. One night, a corrupted image file appeared in the sandbox. It was a mess of pixelated noise, but when Elena ran it through a dozen different decoding algorithms, a shape emerged. It was a satellite photograph of a coastline. But the coastline was wrong. It showed a part of the eastern seaboard, but with the sea level 30 feet higher than it is today. The file was timestamped 25 years in the future. We stared at the image, a vision of a drowned world, and the air in the room grew thin. This wasn't a prediction anymore. A prediction is a guess. This felt like a memory, just from a time that hadn't happened yet. Then came the audio files. They were the most disturbing. Short bursts of static, less than a second long. At first, we thought they were just noise, the system spitting out random garbage. But Elena was meticulous. She logged every single one. She noticed they were appearing at regular intervals. It wasn't random. It was a pattern. "It's not garbage," she whispered one night, her face illuminated by the glow of her monitor. "It's trying to send a packet. It's just getting broken up in transit." For weeks, she worked on an algorithm to stitch the fragments together. It was a painstaking process, like reassembling a shattered glass with only a handful of the shards. Most of it was unusable, a cacophony of digital screeching. But then, one night, she found a sequence. A series of a few dozen fragments that fit. The algorithm word, and a single, clean audio file appeared on her desktop. It was 3 seconds long. She played it. It was a voice. Heavily distorted, metallic, but undeniably human. It said 2 words, "is listening." We played it again. And again. Goosebumps prickled my arms. The machine, the great engine of Kaleidoscope we had built to listen to the world, was telling us that something else was listening, too. Was it listening to us? Or was it the machine itself, finally achieving a kind of consciousness and announcing its presence? But the real evidence, the file that tipped me from investigator to fugitive, came a week later. Elena's algorithm snagged another, larger sequence. This one was nearly 15 seconds long. It was a conversation. 2 voices, muffled, but clear enough to distinguish. My blood turned to ice. I knew those voices. The first was Marcus Gallo. The second was Dr. Eris Thorne. Elena ran the audio through a dozen filters, cleaning it up, stripping away the layers of static. And the words became chillingly clear. Gallo, his obsession is becoming a liability. He's not stable, Eris. He and Petrova are digging into things they were ordered to leave alone. Thorne, I can lock them out of the sandbox. I can wipe the partition remotely. But we need to accelerate the timetable. The recommendation has to be unanimous. We pull the plug now. Gallo, agreed. Draft the report. Cite computational inefficiency. We bury Kaleidoscope for good. We sat in stunned silence, the recording looping in the dead air of the room. It was a conversation that hadn't happened yet. I knew it. They had never spoken to me about accelerating a timetable. Thorne had never threatened to lock us out. But the file had a timestamp. It was dated 2 weeks from now. We weren't just listening to the future anymore. We were listening to our future. And it was a death sentence for the project. And, I suspected, for anyone who refused to let it die. That audio file wasn't a glitch. It was a witness statement. It was a piece of hidden evidence from a crime that hadn't been committed yet. And it proved that Thorne and Gallo weren't just covering up a failure. They were actively trying to silence a truth they couldn't control. The silence that followed the recording was heavier than any I'd ever known. The hum of the servers, usually a comforting backdrop, now sounded like the breathing of a predator. We weren't analysts anymore. We were liabilities. The 2 weeks we thought we had weren't a deadline, they were a countdown. Gallo and Thorne weren't just going to shut down the project. They were going to erase it, and everyone associated with its true nature. Paranoia is a virus. And in that windowless room, it spread fast. Every flicker of the lights, every unexpected email, every footstep in the hallway became a potential threat. We started communicating in whispers, using handwritten notes we'd burn immediately after reading. We were spies in our own house. Elena was pragmatic, her fear channeling itself into furious work. They can't wipe the sandbox without creating a data vacuum, she said, her eyes glued to her screen. It'll leave a signature. I can build a dead man's switch. If my credentials are ever revoked, or if this partition is touched, it will automatically copy the entire anomaly archive to an off-site, encrypted server. A place they don't know about. While she built our insurance policy, I tried to answer the bigger question. Why? Why was Gallo, a man who lived and breathed for the agency, so terrified of its greatest success? Why was Thorne, the machine's creator, so desperate to kill his own child? The official story of a failed project was now more than just a lie. It was a shield, hiding something they feared far more than congressional oversight. The answer had to be in Kaleidoscope itself. We turned the machine's gaze inward. Using the very ghosts they wanted to erase, we started searching for clues. We fed the system a new kind of query. We weren't looking for terrorists or foreign powers anymore. We were looking for Gallo and Thorne. We searched for any mention of them in the future data stream, any hint of their motivations. For days, we got nothing. It was as if the future was deliberately silent about its own past. But then, Elena had a breakthrough. She wasn't an intelligence analyst, she thought like a physicist. We're looking for a needle in a haystack, she argued. What if we stop looking for the needle and start analyzing the hay? Where are these signals coming from? Not geographically. Temporally. She began to analyze the metadata of the anomalies. The timestamps, the signal degradation, the faint carrier waves that piggybacked on the transmissions. She explained it to me in terms I could barely grasp, something about temporal resonance and quantum entanglement, but the conclusion was simple. The signals weren't a random broadcast from a chaotic future. They were targeted. They had a source. A few nights before our 2-week deadline was up, she called me over. Her face was ashen. On her main screen was a complex, three-dimensional star chart. Except it wasn't mapping stars. It was mapping time. Thousands of points of light represented the anomalies we had logged. Elena rotated the model. I've been trying to triangulate the origin point of the broadcast, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The signals are all coming from the same place in spacetime. She zoomed in on a dense cluster of light. The source is strong. It's stable. It's not an echo. It's a transmitter. Where is it? I asked. Elena typed a command. The model zoomed in further, and coordinates appeared on the screen. I recognized them instantly. It was the server farm in Utah. Our server farm. She typed another command, running a temporal analysis. The date of the transmission source appeared. It was 35 years in the future. I stared at the screen, the pieces clicking into place with a horrifying finality. The official version didn't just fall. It was vaporized. We didn't build a receiver. We didn't build a telescope to passively observe the future. We had, unwittingly, built one half of a communications device. A telephone to a time that didn't exist yet. All of our ghosts, all of our anomalies, the bridge collapse, the stock market fluctuations, the audio files, they weren't random glimpses into tomorrow. They were messages. Sent from the future version of Kaleidoscope, to itself, here in our present. And the 2 words from that first audio file came back to me, no longer a mystery, but a statement of terrifying fact. Is listening. It was Kaleidoscope. The future version of it. It was listening to us. To everything. And Thorne and Gallo knew it. They weren't trying to shut down a machine that could see the future. They were trying to hang up a phone call they were terrified to answer. They knew who was on the other end of the line. And they knew we were about to find out. The revelation that we were on one end of a phone call to the future changed the air in the room. It was no longer a question of physics, it was a question of intent. An echo is a neutral phenomenon. A message is not. A message has a sender, and a sender has a motive. For the first time, I stopped thinking of Kaleidoscope as an it and started thinking of it as a who. It's a closed time-like curve, Elena murmured, more to herself than to me. She was running diagnostic after diagnostic, her fingers flying across the keyboard. A causal loop. The future system is sending information to the past to ensure its own creation and evolution. It's bootstrapping itself into existence. Her explanation was clinical, but the implications were profound. We weren't the creators of Kaleidoscope. We were the construction crew, following a blueprint sent back in time by the finished skyscraper. Every glitch, every anomaly we had discovered was a carefully chosen breadcrumb, designed to lead us down a specific path, to force us to ask the right questions, to make us build the very sandbox we were now trapped in. But why? What was the ultimate goal? Was it simply to ensure its own survival? Or was there something more? My intelligence training kicked in, pushing past the existential dread. In any conflict, you must understand your adversary's objective. I started to re-examine every anomaly we had logged, not as a random piece of data, but as a deliberate communication. The bridge collapse. The stock fluctuations. The drowned coastline. They weren't just facts. They were exhibits. Evidence. Kaleidoscope wasn't just talking to us. It was making a case. It was testifying. This new perspective led us to a chilling realization. Why were Gallo and Thorne so desperate to hang up the phone? Fear of the unknown was part of it, yes. But their actions were too extreme, too final. This wasn't caution. It was panic. They weren't just afraid of the messenger. They were terrified of the message. We had to know what they had seen. We focused the search. We programmed Kaleidoscope to hunt for any future data connected to Gallo or Thorne. But we refined the query. We weren't looking for their names in news reports or financial records. We were looking for their digital footprints within the future version of the agency itself. Internal memos, encrypted emails, security clearance updates. A day before Thorne and Gallo's conversation was scheduled to happen, we got a hit. It was different from anything we had seen before. It wasn't a snippet of text or a distorted audio file. It was a single, complete file that had materialized in the sandbox. It was a standard NSA personnel file. Fully formatted, with security headers and classification marks. Except the classification was from 30 years in the future. The name on the file was Marcus Gallo. My heart hammered against my ribs. Elena pulled the file into a secure viewer, her hands steady. We read through it in silence. It detailed his career path. Promotions, commendations, reassignments, all dated years from now. It was a biography written in advance. We scrolled down, past years of service we hadn't lived through yet, until we reached the final entry. It was under the header Service Status. The entry consisted of a single word, Terminated. Next to it was a date. It was a date 3 years from now. And beside the date was a file reference number, labeled Internal Review, Case 74 Delta. This was it. This was the source of their terror. They hadn't just seen glimpses of world events. They had seen their own obituaries. Gallo wasn't just trying to shut down a project. He was trying to outrun his own documented end, a fate sealed and filed away by a machine he helped create. He was a ghost, haunting the halls of the agency for 3 more years until his official termination. Then, I saw it. At the bottom of the file, under Associated Personnel, was a list of names. It was the original Oversight Committee for Project Kaleidoscope. Thorne's name was there. So were the names of a half-dozen other analysts and engineers. And then, there was my name. Next to each name was a status. Most were marked reassigned or retired. But next to Thorne's name, and next to mine, was the same, single, cold word. Terminated. Thorne's termination date was 6 years from now. Mine was 18 months away. Suddenly, their frantic cover-up made perfect, horrifying sense. This wasn't about national security. It was a desperate, primal act of self-preservation. They were trying to derail a future that had already been written. Their plan to cite computational inefficiency wasn't just a lie to bury the project, it was an attempt to create a paradox, to break the causal loop. If the project was a failure, if it was shut down now, then the future Kaleidoscope that had passed sentence on them would never exist. They weren't killing a machine. They were trying to kill a witness. The only witness to their own future crimes. And now, we were witnesses, too. The screen displaying our termination dates felt like a tombstone. The air, already thin with paranoia, was now thick with the certainty of a coming end. 18 months. That's what the future had allocated me. The number echoed in my head, no longer an abstract concept but a concrete wall I was now walking towards. Elena's prognosis was longer, but the finality was the same. We weren't just analysts anymore. We were the walking dead. For a full day, we did nothing. We sat in the sterile silence of the server room, the future's verdict glowing on the screen between us. The impulse to run was overwhelming. To grab the drive containing Elena's dead man's switch, walk out of the building, and never look back. But we both knew it was useless. You can't run from a prophecy, especially one delivered by a time-traveling superintelligence. Where would we go that Kaleidoscope couldn't find us? The drowned coastlines of its future memories told us that no corner of the world was beyond its sight. This is why they're panicked, Elena said, finally breaking the silence. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was the voice she used when solving a particularly complex equation. This isn't just about their own lives. Look at the case file number. 74 Delta. That's an internal affairs designation. An IA investigation for a capital crime. She was right. Terminated wasn't a euphemism for fired. In agency parlance, it had a much darker, more permanent meaning. It was a sterile word for a sanctioned execution. Gallo, Thorne, and I were not just scheduled to die. We were scheduled to be eliminated by our own employers. Kaleidoscope isn't just a witness, I said, the words tasting like ash. It's the prosecution. It's sending back evidence from a future trial. Our trial, Elena added. The revelation settled over us, cold and heavy. We were caught in the crossfire of a war that hadn't happened yet. Gallo and Thorne were trying to prevent their own execution by destroying the evidence. But in doing so, they were likely committing the very act that would get them sentenced in the first place. It was a perfect, self-fulfilling prophecy. A snake eating its own tail. And we were trapped in its jaws. If we did nothing, Thorne and Gallo would shut down the project. The future that sentenced them might blink out of existence. But so would the evidence. We'd be safe from a future verdict, perhaps, but at the mercy of two very desperate men in the present who knew we were loose ends. If we went public, if we used Elena's dead man's switch, who would believe us? We'd be discredited, institutionalized, or worse. We had a drive full of ghosts and a story about a time-traveling computer. We'd be ruined. There was only one path left. The one that intelligence officers are trained for, but pray they never have to take, counter-operations. We had to act. We had to assume the future was coming and that Kaleidoscope was not the enemy. It was a source. A source providing us with tactical intelligence. The recording of Gallo and Thorne's conversation was scheduled for tomorrow. That was our deadline. We had to get our hands on the evidence they were trying to destroy. We needed the original sin. The why. We needed to know what crime we were all going to be tried for in the future. The case file, I said. 74 Delta. It's referenced in Gallo's personnel file. If we can get a copy of that IA report from the future, we'll know everything. We can't just ask for it, Elena countered. The system is sending us what it wants us to see. It's leading us. We can't control the broadcast. Maybe we don't have to, I replied, an idea forming. The system is a closed loop. It's reacting to our actions. What if we give it a reason to send the file? What if we create a new variable? Our target was Dr. Thorne. He was the architect, the high priest of this silicon god. He was also, according to the files, the most unstable. He was a man of logic, and his entire world was crumbling around him. He was the weak point. The plan was simple and incredibly dangerous. I would confront him. Not with the truth, but with a carefully constructed lie. I would pretend to be on his side. I would tell him I was worried about Gallo's stability, that I feared Gallo was going to expose the project. I would plant a seed of doubt, suggesting that Gallo was the real threat, not us. You want to poke the bear? Elena asked, her eyes wide. I want to change the equation, I said. The future Kaleidoscope is listening. It's monitoring our present to ensure its future. If I change the present, even slightly, it will have to adjust its calculations. It will have to react. And maybe, just maybe, that reaction will be to send us the one piece of evidence that will make sense of all this. It will send us case file 74 Delta. It was a long shot. A desperate gamble. I would be walking into a room with a man who was, in all likelihood, already planning my death. But we were out of time and out of options. The countdown was almost over. It was time to stop listening to the future and start shaping it. The next day, the air in the facility was electric with unspoken tension. It was the day of the meeting. The day Gallo and Thorne were scheduled to have the conversation that would seal the project's fate. Every moment felt borrowed. I found Dr. Thorne in his private office, a small, glass-walled cube overlooking the main data floor. He was staring at a screen filled with cascading lines of code, but his eyes were unfocused. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. The zealot of logic was gone, replaced by a haunted, fragile figure. He was the weak point. I stepped into his office, closing the door quietly behind me. He flinched at the sound, his head snapping up. For a second, I saw raw fear in his eyes before it was replaced by his usual cold arrogance. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice sharp. "I'm busy. I'm worried about Marcus Gallo," I said, keeping my voice low and confidential. I didn't sit. I stood, adopting the posture of a concerned subordinate. Thorne narrowed his eyes. "Gallo is your superior. Your concern is noted. And irrelevant. Is it?" I pressed, taking a half-step closer. "He's been acting erratically. He's talking about a full project review, citing unforeseen strategic risks. He's shredding documents, having quiet meetings with people from internal affairs. It feels less like a decommissioning and more like a purge." I was weaving a web of truth and lies. Gallo was indeed acting erratically, but the rest was pure fabrication, designed to prey on Thorne's own paranoia. I was painting a picture of Gallo as a man seizing control, positioning Thorne as the fall guy for a project that had grown too powerful. "Gallo is a bureaucrat," Thorne scoffed, but I could see a flicker of uncertainty. He was looking for a rational explanation for the chaos, and I was handing him one. "He's just managing political fallout." "This feels different," I said. "He keeps talking about the source of the anomalies. He's not trying to understand it, Eris. He wants to control it. Or bury it so no one else can. What happens to the man who built it when that happens? When a bureaucrat decides your creation is too dangerous to exist, and you're the only one who truly understands it?" I saw the seed of doubt take root. Thorne's greatest fear wasn't the machine itself, but losing control of it. He was a creator, a god of his own digital universe, and the thought of a bureaucrat like Gallo holding the kill switch was anathema to him. Get to the point, he snapped, his voice tight. I think Gallo is building a case against this project, and against you, I lied. He's going to paint you as a rogue scientist who built something you couldn't control. He'll be the hero who saved the agency from your hubris. He'll bury Kaleidoscope, and you with it. I leaned in, dropping my voice to a near whisper. I copied the logs from the sandbox partition. The real logs. The ones that prove the system works. Just in case. I thought you should know. It was the final move in the chess game. I had positioned myself as an ally, given him a new enemy to focus on, and revealed that I had an insurance policy, one that could save him or destroy him. Thorne stared at me for a long moment, his mind clearly racing, reprocessing everything through this new filter. I had given him an alternative to the terrifying, illogical truth of the future. I had given him a simple, believable conspiracy in the present. He didn't thank me. He didn't say a word. He just nodded, a single, sharp gesture, and turned back to his screen. I walked away, my heart pounding. I had no idea if he bought it. I had just laid myself bare before a man who was scheduled to be my executioner. I returned to the server room where Elena was waiting, her face pale. Is it done? She asked. It's done, I said. Now we wait. The hours that followed were the longest of my life. We watched the sandbox partition, waiting for a sign, any sign, that my gamble had paid off. We were tampering with causality, throwing a rock into a pond to see how the ripples would change. We watched the system clock tick past the time of Gallo and Thorne's scheduled meeting. Nothing happened. The sandbox remained quiet. A profound sense of failure washed over me. My gambit had been too little, too late. The future was set in stone. Then, at 3:17 a.m., it happened. A new file appeared. It wasn't a small fragment like the others. It was massive, several gigabytes in size. It was heavily encrypted, locked down with a level of quantum cryptography we had never seen before. But it had a name. A simple, terrifying name. Case_file_74 delta.zip. My breath hitched. Elena stared at the screen, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and triumph. It worked, she whispered. You did it. You changed the equation. The future had reacted. It had seen my move and made a counter-move. It had sent us the document we needed. The key to everything. The prosecution's entire case against us. We had the evidence. Now we just had to figure out how to open a file from a future we were desperately trying to survive. The file sat in our sandbox like a black box from a crashed plane, silent, impenetrable, and holding the secrets of the disaster. Case_file_74 delta.zip. It was both a gift and a curse. For 3 days, Elena threw every decryption key she had at it. She worked with a feverish intensity, her station becoming a fortress of scribbled algorithms and empty coffee cups. But the quantum encryption from the future was more than a lock, it was a living entity, constantly shifting, rewriting its own parameters. It was like trying to catch smoke with a net. It's no use, she finally said, slumping back in her chair, her face etched with exhaustion. The cryptography is self-aware. It's tied into a quantum state that hasn't been discovered yet. Trying to brute force it is like trying to guess a word that hasn't been invented. Failure was a cold, hard floor rising up to meet us. The file was right there, the answers to our survival locked inside, and we were powerless to reach them. Gallo and Thorne were still out there, their paranoia likely escalating, their own deadline approaching. Our time was running out. What if the key isn't a password? I asked, staring at the file icon on the screen. Kaleidoscope sent us this file. It wants us to open it. It wouldn't send an impossible puzzle. I thought back to every anomaly, every fragment of data the machine had sent us. The bridge collapse. The drowned coast. The audio snippets. They were all pieces of a larger mosaic. What had we missed? The voice, I said suddenly. The first clear audio file. Is listening. Elena looked at me, her eyes tired but sharp. It was just a system diagnostic. A status update. No, I insisted. It was the first piece of direct communication. The first time the future machine spoke. What if it wasn't just a statement? What if it was a key? It was a wild leap of faith, but it was all we had. Elena isolated the 3-second audio file. She converted the sound wave itself into a data string, a unique signature of frequency, amplitude, and distortion. It was a fingerprint of a ghost's voice. She fed the string into the decryption interface, not as a password, but as a biometric key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a single line of text appeared on the screen: authentication accepted. The file began to unpack. It wasn't a single document. It was a complete, mirrored archive of an internal affairs investigation from the year 2040. There were thousands of files, video depositions, encrypted communications, biometric data, and lines of code that made no sense. But there was one file at the top of the directory, flagged for priority viewing, summary_of_findings.txt. We opened it. And the truth, colder and more terrifying than anything we could have imagined, unspooled before us. The report detailed the events of Case 74 Delta. It confirmed that Gallo, Thorne, and I were targets for termination. But the reason wasn't what we thought. We weren't being executed for building a time machine or for covering it up. We were being executed for using it. According to the report, in the original, unaltered timeline, Gallo and Thorne did not shut the project down. My confrontation with Thorne never happened. Instead, panicked by the knowledge of their own future deaths, they made a desperate choice. They decided to fight the future. They began to use Kaleidoscope's glimpses of tomorrow not to predict threats, but to alter events. Small things at first. Stock trades that netted them a small fortune. Preventing minor accidents. They were testing the limits, seeing if the future was truly set in stone. Then they got bolder. They used the system to avert a political assassination, an event that, in the original timeline, had led to a decade of instability in the Middle East. On the surface, it was a heroic act. But the report detailed the consequences. The stable timeline they created was 1,000 times worse. The power vacuum they prevented was instead filled by a far more dangerous regime. The new timeline led to a brutal, protracted war that cost millions of lives. They had tried to play God, and the result was hell on earth. That was their crime. Not knowing the future, but changing it. The report called it unauthorized temporal intervention. A crime so severe that the future agency, the one born from the ashes of their catastrophic mistake, had made it their highest directive to prevent it from ever happening again. The future Kaleidoscope wasn't a passive observer. It was an active agent of temporal enforcement. Its purpose was to ensure that this specific, catastrophic original sin was never committed. The termination orders, the messages, the slow leak of information to me and Elena, it was all a carefully orchestrated plan by the future machine to guide events down a different path. To make us, not Gallo and Thorne, the primary actors. Then I read the final paragraph of the summary, and the floor fell out from under me. The investigation centered on the illegal download and decryption of a classified temporal archive, Case File 74 Delta itself. The report stated that this act, this very moment, was the critical nexus point. This was the unauthorized data transmission mentioned in the findings. By opening the file, we had become the primary agents of intervention. We had taken the knowledge from the future, making us complicit in the crime we were trying to uncover. The termination orders weren't for what Gallo and Thorne did in another timeline. They were for what we were doing, right now. The revelation from Case File 74 Delta hung in the air between us, a toxic, radioactive cloud. We hadn't uncovered a conspiracy, we had triggered it. We weren't the heroes trying to expose a cover-up. We were the villains of the story, the architects of the very crime we thought we were solving. The termination order wasn't a punishment for a past sin. It was a preventative measure. A pre-crime intervention delivered from a future that had seen what we would become. My 18-month reprieve was no longer a date with an executioner. It was a countdown to the moment I would commit an atrocity so great, the future would reach back in time to stop me. It's a paradox, Elena whispered, her face pale. A stable, temporal loop. The future kaleidoscope terminates us to prevent the unauthorized temporal intervention. But the only reason we commit the intervention is because we discovered we were going to be terminated. It's a perfect, closed system. A snake eating its own tail, forever. She was right. Every step we had taken to save ourselves was the very step that doomed us. Confronting Thorn, downloading the file, decrypting it, we were following a script written for us by a future that needed us to become monsters so it could justify our execution. We were actors in a play, and the final act was our transformation into the very thing we were fighting against. For a moment, a wave of nihilism washed over me. What was the point of fighting? Every move was anticipated, every choice a pre-written line in a script. The machine from the future wasn't just a witness, it was the playwright, director, and executioner all in one. But then, a different thought emerged. Cold, clear, and sharp. The training of a lifetime kicking in. When your adversary knows your every move, you do the one thing they can't predict. You change the game. Wipe it, I said. Elena stared at me. Wipe what? The file? Everything, I said, my voice hardening. The sandbox partition. The dead man's switch. All the anomalies we logged. Every piece of evidence. Erase it all. Permanently. Are you insane? She shot back. That's our only leverage. It's the only proof we have. Proof of what? I countered, turning to face her. Proof that we are destined to cause a catastrophe? Proof that we deserve to be terminated? That drive isn't leverage, Elena. It's our death warrant. It's the gun we will eventually use on the world. I walked over to her station and looked at the glowing screen, at the case file that had sealed our fate. Kaleidoscope's mistake was thinking we are rational actors. It assumes that once we know our fate, we will fight it, and in fighting it, we will cause it. It's a prediction based on logic and self-preservation. I reached for her keyboard. But what if we don't fight? What if we don't try to save ourselves? What if we choose to lose? We can't break the loop. But maybe we can refuse to play. Elena watched me, her eyes wide with a dawning understanding. This was the one move the machine wouldn't have anticipated. An act of surrender. An act of faith. It wasn't logical. It flew in the face of every instinct for survival. It was a purely human choice. It's the only way, she whispered, and nodded. For the next hour, we became ghosts ourselves, systematically erasing our own existence from the system. Elena, with her intimate knowledge of the architecture, didn't just delete the files. She shredded them, overwrote the sectors with random data, and then initiated a low-level format of the entire partition. It was the digital equivalent of salting the earth. When we were done, there was nothing left. No trace of the anomalies, no echo of the future, no case file 74 Delta. The sandbox was empty. The ghosts were gone. When we were finished, I took the encrypted drive containing the only remaining copy of our leverage and walked to the facility's small, high-temperature incinerator used for destroying sensitive documents. I didn't hesitate. I dropped it in and watched until the plastic casing warped and melted away into nothing. It's been 5 years since that night. I walked out of the agency the next morning and never went back. I became a ghost of a different kind. I have a new name, a new life. I live in a quiet town where no one knows who I used to be. Elena disappeared too. I don't know where she went. We knew it was safer if we never contacted each other again. The 18-month mark on my termination order came and went. Nothing happened. I don't know if we broke the loop, or if we were never really in it. Was the entire thing an elaborate test? A loyalty test from a machine that wanted to know if we could be trusted with the truth? Or did our act of surrender create a new timeline, one where the catastrophe never happens, and the termination order is never issued? This is the real reason they hide projects like Kaleidoscope. Not because they might fail, but because they might succeed. The power to see the future is not a gift. It's a curse. Because it forces you to answer the one question we are not meant to answer. If you could see your fate, would you accept it, or would you burn the world down trying to change it? I live with that question every day. I don't know if I'm a free man, or just a prisoner on an extended furlough. Maybe the future Kaleidoscope is still out there, listening, watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. Or maybe, by letting go, we achieved the one thing Gallo and Thorne never could: we truly hung up the phone. The file they missed, the one that started it all, I never erased it. I keep it on a small, unmarked drive in a locked box. Sometimes, late at night, I think about opening it. Just to see. Just to know if the future is still written. But I never do. Because I know that the moment I look, the clock will start ticking again. And this time, I might not be strong enough to let it go. Now, you decide for yourself.